the single best event in Warframe history, Operation Plague Star, will return next week, and trust me, you do not want to miss this. Because apart from some standard event rewards, you can get, and this is no exaggeration, hundreds of fully built Forma out of it if you play your cards right. So, in this Warframe guide, I'm gonna tell you what exactly is going on, how to play Operation Plague Star to get all of that for yourself, but most importantly, what you need to do right now to prepare for it. Big shoutouts to all our generous channel members, and now, let's jump right into it. Now, first things first, what the heck is even going on? See, in yesterday's dev short, Rebecca and Steve announced that Operation Plague Star, the probably most profitable event in Warframe history, will return soon. When exactly? On September the 10th, that is exactly in 1 week, and then you will have 2 weeks to play it. As for what the event itself actually is about, I'm gonna give you a full rundown in a minute here, but to make it very short, it's basically a special bounty mission in the Plains of Eidolon that you gotta run over and over and over again to gain the rewards from the event shop. And now that we're already speaking about rewards, how about we first of all talk about what you can actually get out of the event, because let's be real, that is why we play it in the first place. See, first and foremost, as part of the shop inventory, you will get access to a bunch of Plains of Eidolon stuff. Rare crystals, fish-related resources, there are also a couple of mods there, but, and this is where it gets a bit more interesting, Operation Plague Star also has event-exclusive weapons, that being for example the Snipetron, which is not a good weapon but you can use it for mastery fodder, the Ether Daggers, which I wouldn't recommend because they're not exclusive to this event, same with the Ghoul Saw. However, there are also 4 Zaw parts in the shop that you can use to craft your custom Zaw in Cetus, and those are actually pretty good, so I would recommend definitely getting 1 copy of each of them, ideally even more. However, and I want to make this very clear, the reason why 99% of players grind their freaking eyes out in this event has nothing to do with the aforementioned, but with the fact that you can get pre-built Forma from the event shop as well. And if you play the event right and optimized, then 1 Forma will only take you between 5 and 10 minutes, so if you're wild, you can literally get hundreds of Forma out of this event. That was no exaggeration. Now, to be completely transparent, in the dev shorts they also said that they are gonna bring in some new stuff this year. They didn't necessarily disclose all of it, however I'm pretty sure that Plague Star also this year will remain primarily the Forma event. And now like the video to get 69 extra Forma. Cheers so much for your support. But now that I hooked you with the promise of infinite Formas, let's talk about how the event exactly works, because it's been quite a while since we had it and I can imagine that a lot of you will probably have never even heard of it. First off, Operation Plague Star is an event that is centered in Cetus and the Plains of Eidolon, meaning it is theoretically possible to access it already in the very early game, which is good because I would recommend doing this even as a beginner. In Cetus, the event vendor, where you can get the aforementioned rewards, that would be Nakak right here. Unfortunately, I don't have in-game footage of the very event shop because I didn't record it back in 2023 when we had the last rerun, but I'm gonna put you a wiki page or something on screen so you can get a feeling of how it's gonna look. Now, this Nakak shop is gonna function as a sort of event-exclusive syndicate that you level up with the standing you gain from running the mission, and once you reach the maximum level of 3 with Nakak, then you will have access to all of this. It's not gonna take all too long to get there. Now, as for the mission itself, you gotta go to Konzu as if you're gonna pick a normal bounty, scroll down and you will have 3 options to pick from. Again, I don't have old footage from this myself, but the way it looks is you have 3 Plague Star bounties, 1 being the basic one, this is low level, everybody can do this, and it gives you 1,000 standing. Then you have the advanced version, which has higher enemy levels and contains a boss fight at the end. Don't worry, we're gonna get to that. This then will give you 3,200 standing. And then there's also a Steel Path version with higher enemy levels and even tankier boss fight for 3,800. A quick disclaimer, the exact standing numbers looked a bit different in the gameplay videos that I saw from the old event, but this right here is what the wiki says. Shouldn't make all too much of a difference. Here is an exact rundown of what you're gonna do. First of all, go to your clan's dojo into the Infested lab because there you'll find a research project for an item called Infested Catalyst. You want to research that and then get the blueprint for it so you can craft those Infested Catalysts in your foundry. Up next, if you've never played Plaguestar before, then you first gotta run the basic version of the mission 3 times. This is because in order to play the higher level missions, you not only need the aforementioned Infested Catalyst, but also an item called Eidolon Phylaxis, and in order to get the blueprint for that, you need to first run the basic mission once to upgrade your ranking from 0 to 1 with the Syndicate, and then 2 more times because it costs 2,000 standing to get the Eidolon Phylaxis blueprint out of the Nakak shop. Once you have that though, craft Eidolon Phylaxis and Infested Catalysts, and then you could use them to play the Advanced or even the Steel Path mission for the utmost standing possible. Here's a rundown of how this bounty looks like. Again, I don't have own gameplay footage of the very event, but that's no problem because it takes place in the Plains of Eidolon, so I can still show you the exact locations and everything and what's happening. This Plaguestar bounty has 4 stages. Stage 1 is super duper simple. Go into the marked cave, take the elevator down, grab a canister from a machine and get out. That's it. Up next, you bring that canister to one of those vehicles right here. It's going to be marked on the map, and then you have to defend it for 3 minutes. Also here, it's a standard defense thing. It's 3 minutes of waiting, switch on a YouTube video or something on the side and you're gonna be fine. The third stage is a standard drone escort mission, the same way that we already know from the Cetus bounties, where a drone is gonna bring that now mixed canister to a big infested blob that you'll find in the center of the map. All you gotta do is escort the drone safely to then start the 4th and final stage of the mission. Quick tip on the side here, if you manage to keep the drone at 80% health or higher, then you're gonna get a little bit of bonus standing for this mission, 25 standing on the base variant, 75 on the advanced, and 100 on the steel path. In my opinion, not necessarily worth tryharding for, just wanted to let you know. And then finally the 4th stage is gonna be the big showdown. Near this infested blob, you're gonna have to take out a bunch of infested enemies that will spawn there. In the easy base variant of the mission, you only have to take out normal ads and that's gonna be it. However, in the advanced and the steel path version, you're also gonna have to fight 4 hemocytes. These are bosses spawning from the big infested blob, and they are exact copies of the Lephantis enemy, the boss on Deimos. So, very simple, what happens here is take out the small infested until a hemocyte spawns, take out the hemocyte, and then rinse and repeat 4 times. After that, the bounty is over, you get your standing, go back to Cetus, and repeat as often as you want. So yeah, if you do the advanced or the steel path version, then 1 run is gonna give you enough standing for 1 pre-built Forma. Meaning, in other words, if you squeeze out the last drop of efficiency and finish those runs as quickly as possible, then you can get an ungodly amount of Forma out of this event. So, the next thing I want to talk about is how to make this whole thing as optimized as possible. Well, first of all, since there are multiple stages in different locations on the Plains of Eidolon, you definitely want to have an Archwing, so you can get from A to B faster. Then, for the first stage in the cave where you have to grab the canister, there's not that much you could optimize. If you wanted to, you could of course use somebody like Volt as a speed frame who runs faster, or even more ideal, Wukong or Titania, who can quickly fly through the base, but again, you're not gonna save tons of time here. Same thing goes for the second stage. It's a 3-minute defense, it's always gonna take 3 minutes, nothing you could speed up, but for the drone escort, there is actually quite a lot you can do. On the one hand, you could use Loki, taking advantage of his switch teleport ability, where you can run ahead and then switch teleport with the drone to make it advance faster. Alternatively, what you can also do is play Nova with her portals, because the drone can fly through the portals, which in turn also skips a lot of the path. However, you will have a bit of trial and error here, since it can happen that the drone just bypasses the portal altogether. And then finally, I have heard that Volt's speed buff does affect the drone apparently. I haven't tested that myself, I will test it once the event goes live. Maybe you can confirm it in the comments down below if you know that it works. Don't know exactly if this is correct. And then finally, the 4th stage is always the longest part of the mission, especially in the Steel Path difficulty, because the Hemocyte boss has a lot of damage reduction, but luckily there is a lot to optimize here. First of all, one of the best choices for this stage is also again Nova, with her 4th ability built into speed, because this way you can speed up all the small enemies around you to come to you faster so you can take them out faster and spawn the Hemocide sooner. Then, because the Hemocide is a 1-to-1 copy of Lephantis, you also have this mechanic where the body is completely untouchable and you can only deal damage to the 3 heads when they briefly open up for a second while attacking you. And because the heads are not open for long, some of the best choices here are Warframes with slow abilities, like for example Nova with her 4 again, just this time in the slow version. If you manage to slow the Hemocide exactly the moment the head opens up, then it will stay up for longer, you can deal more damage to it. Same thing goes for Rhino's Stomp, which is a great ability for this specific boss fight. Stomp the ground under the Hemocide whenever the head is open, but of course other slowing abilities like Snow Globe, Temporal Drag and so on do also work. As for the damage output, first of all, you want to have some source of armor reduction. This could be an ability like Necros' Terrify, Styanax's Tharo Strike, and so on and so forth. But even without armor, this thing is very tanky because it has damage attenuation on top. So what you're aiming for here is either a weapon that shoots a lot of pellets at the same time, or at least something like the Burst on Prime Incarnon, which has a lot of crit, high fire rate, and strong DPS. In contrast, single-shot weapons that deal a lot of damage per shot are not advised here, because with the Hemocide, you just can't deal more than a certain amount of damage per shot, so just opt for more shots. Last year, the most meta weapon for this was the Piranha Prime in the secondary slot, but I've also seen good results with the Burst on Prime Incarnon, so these would be my 2 recommendations going into this event this year. Don't worry, we're gonna talk about builds in just a second. As for Warframes, of course, Rhino and Nova for the slow are great options for the final stage, but one thing that is also very cool would be Titania, because none of the enemies can shoot her out of her Razor Wing, and flying over the enemies means she practically can't get hit. But, and this is also very important, because of the fact that there is a damage cap per hit against the Hemocide, those Warframes with abilities that count as separate damage instants, like Saren's Toxic Lash, like Cyto9's Ammo, like Oraxia's 4, and like Zata's Whisper from Zaku, those are something that I would definitely recommend trying out, because if I'm not mistaken, then those separate damage instances register not as buff for the shot that you fire, but as separate shot, meaning they can be used to kind of bypass this damage cap per shot by, just dealing more shots. But what are your favorite options? Let us know in the comments down below. But now, let's finally talk about the builds, my personal recommendations to go into this mission with. If you are a solo player and you do not want to do this with a team, then the by far best frame to play this with would be Nova. Because she can speed up the drone with her portals, because she can speed up the small enemies in the final stage, and because she can slow down the Hemocide to keep the heads open for longer so you can deal more damage. For a solo player, Nova is the #1 choice. Next, on this Nova, I would recommend Zata's Whisper from Zaku as a helmet ability because of the aforementioned second damage instance, so you deal more shots against the heads. And for the armor reduction, you're not going to use an ability, but instead you're going to use a melee weapon, a gunblade to be precise, that being either the Sarpa or the Vastalog with the mod Shattering Impact, because with that you can just shoot at the Hemocide and get rid of their armor very quick and easy. This right here would be an example build. You don't need it to deal damage, all you want to do here is armor strip through Shattering Impact. Then, your main damage dealing weapon will either be the Piranha Prime with a build somewhat like this here. Remember though, faction enemy weaknesses have been reworked since the last run of the event, so Corrosive Blast or whatever is not the right damage type for the Hemocide anymore. The Hemocide is now considered infested, so heat damage is the way to go with a 50% damage bonus. Alternatively, of course, and this is something that I'm definitely going to try out too, would be the Burst on Prime Incarnon. A lot of DPS, a lot of multi-shot, you know the drill. If you want to know more about it, I have a dedicated guide just on the Burst on Prime Incarnon too. I'm gonna put you the links in the card up in the corner. And then the final weapon slot is of course up to personal preference. I would recommend though to have something with AoE capability, just so that you can clear these small infested enemies that are charging towards you as quickly as possible to spawn the next Hemocide faster. Finally, this would be my Nova build for the event. Some things that are important to mention here would be that in the extra slot, I highly recommend going for preparation, so you start the mission with full energy, you can just jump in and start playing right away. Next, go for more casting speed with either yellow Archon shards or natural talent, because, and that is not only true for Nova but also for Rhino with his stomp, when the head opens and you cast the slow ability, you want to make sure that this ability hits the enemy before the head closes again. Especially with Stomp, it happened to me in the past that the head would open, I would cast Stomp, but the casting animation would take so long that the head was already closed when it hit, and then I froze the Hemocide with a closed head, making the mission longer for everybody, and they hated me for it. With a lot of casting speed, this time window is much easier to hit. As for all the other Warframes that I mentioned before, Rhino, Volt, Titania, and so on, honestly, it doesn't really matter all that much how you build them. Just make sure to follow the tips that I said earlier. Preparation to have full energy at the start, casting speed, very important for Rhino, so you can time the enemy freeze better, and the rest is of course up to personal preference. So yeah, before we end the video, let's also talk about what you can do right now to prepare for the event to be able to start out strong. First of all, if you are a newer player, then definitely make sure to get an Archwing before the event starts. This is the single biggest time save, and you can get one from the quest The Archwing, which can be started once you are on Mars. Up next, and this is also important, if you haven't already, then research the infested catalyst in your infested lab in the clan, because you need this blueprint for the mission, and tied to that is also the next point, that be farm the resources that you need to craft the infested catalyst and the Eidolon Phylaxis, because you're probably gonna need a lot of them if you want to hardcore farm those Forma. The resources in question would be Iridite, Grokdurul, and Nisselpod in the Plains of Eidolon, and then Plastids, Ferrite, and Nanospores for the Eidolon Phylaxis, which you're probably gonna have tons of already. For the Plains resources though, Iridite is found in little stones across the map that you can crack open. My personal favorite here is just take a walk around the lake on the right side of the entrance gate, because there tend to be a lot of those resource deposits spawning there. If you do it at night, I think they're a bit easier to see with the color scheme. Grokdurul is found in Grineer bases on the Plains of Eidolon in those yellow containers that you can break, and Nisselpods are found in higher elevation parts also in the Plains of Eidolon. Just remember, if you farm these resources, ideally do so within a high-level bounty, because with higher bounty levels, the resource drops on the plains will be higher. And then finally, one thing that I would definitely recommend preparing, if you haven't already, is a somewhat decently built Nova. You don't have to exactly copy the build that I showed earlier, of course, but if there is any frame that is tailor-made for this event, then it is Nova, so definitely try to get her. You have one more week, that should be possible. And in case you never played Nova before, then you can check out my full guide right here. Another massive shoutout to Niels V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostlinux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Undercarneo2, Skylar Bowser, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murasaki, Shadow Lockhart, Hantakas, Patrisator, Boomia1, Mr. Games Plays, Zave, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.